Opening credits. Take Me Back. A Cowboy Second Chance romantic short story. By Summer Cooper. Auto-narrated using Google technology. Prologue. I felt a bit like a voyeur as I peered into the barn and watched him step into his jeans, bringing them up over his bare backside in one smooth motion. I couldn't help but feel disappointed that I wouldn't get to see more of his
censored
form, and I found myself sighing in frustration. God, he was gorgeous. Suddenly, he glanced over in the direction of where I was standing, and I ducked low, praying to God that he hadn't seen me spying on him. My heart was thundering in my
censored
as I hid on the other side of the large door, but I couldn't help the big stupid smile spreading across my face. I'd seen Brian Hart.
censored
I couldn't wait to tell Claudia, my best friend since kindergarten. She'd be so jealous. First, I had to find my way back to the main house without Brian catching me. I listened hard, trying to figure out if Brian had already left through the other door. He was normally an early riser, getting up for breakfast with the rest of the ranch hands way before I got up for school. But this morning, he'd been running late, and so my pa had sent me to go get him when he realized Brian wasn't around. The ranch hands had stayed up late last night because there'd been a forest fire not too far from us. It was under control now, but Pa had been concerned the fire would spread to our property. I pretended to be annoyed by Pa's request when secretly I'd been ecstatic, but I wasn't ecstatic now given I was now hiding from Brian. I slowly rose and peeked again into the barn and breathed a sigh of relief. He wasn't there. I quickly turned away and smacked into an unyielding figure that hadn't been there a second earlier. I stumbled back and my eyes grew wide. Brian. He frowned at me, still shirtless. My mind went blank, and I knew I looked guilty and ridiculous with my mouth wide open as I stared at his
censored.
He was perfect. All the romance novels I'd read hadn't prepared me for this moment. I was the heroine, right? Wasn't this when I should say something clever and sassy, then walk away? But I couldn't walk away, my legs wouldn't move. My eyes were glued to his body, as I stood mesmerized by the sight of him. His long legs were covered in jeans that had seen better days. They were covered in dirt, dust, and grime, but that did nothing to take away from my attraction to him. If anything, it made me want him more. I felt myself blush as my eyes traveled upwards, taking in the lines of pure muscle that were his abs. His
censored
was wide in his shoulders, oh God. I just wanted to run my hands over them. They looked like they could carry the world and then some. Brian Hart was the most beautiful man my 18-year-old eyes had ever seen. And he was also 10 years older than me, and related to a family from the city that were rumored to be nothing but trouble. My father had allowed him to live in our barn 2 years ago. I never knew why Pa had been so generous to let a stranger live on the property, especially a stranger that he didn't particularly like, but Pa was always a mystery. I knew his kindness wouldn't be extended if he knew Brian had been the subject of my lately very racy dreams. What are you doing here? Brian asked, frowning. This was a difficult task given that I was a very tall girl, at least 5 feet 11 inches. I just, spit it out. What are you doing out here spying on me? I wasn't spying, I said, blushing. My voice trailed off. I really had no idea what to say. I'd never even spoken to him in the 3 years he'd worked for my dad. He wasn't some high schooler. Brian was a real man. I was
censored.
Get out of here, before you get me into trouble. He turned away from me, making me feel silly and insignificant. I decided at that moment that I was done feeling like an inadequate little girl around him. I wasn't going to let Brian dismiss me so easily. He'd ignored me for 3 years. I was done being ignored. I took a deep breath and scrambled after him. I didn't even think about it as I reached out and touched him, stopping him in his tracks. He turned around with a sneer on his face that promptly turned into a look of confusion when he saw my expression. I think what he saw there scared him. I'm not a little girl anymore, Brian. I moved closer, so close my
Censored.
were only a mere inch from touching his.
Censored.
For the first time ever, Brian seemed caught off guard and unsure of himself. "What are you doing, girl?" "My name is Nikki," I said as I slowly ran my hands up his.
Censored.
He took in a quick breath, and I started to enjoy how the tables were turned for once. For once, I'd taken his breath away. And as I leaned against him, I said, "I'm not a little girl anymore. I'm all woman now." My lips closed over his. Chapter 1. Come on. Push it. Push it. I want everything you got. I yelled as my students groaned and moaned. Some of them fell to the ground, gasping in pain, and I couldn't help but smile a little inside. I was a beast. "Nikki, you're a beast," said one of my clients, barely able to get the words out through his heavy breathing. I kneeled next to him with a big smile on my face. "Jameson, you're too kind." He collapsed to the floor and I reached a hand out. He grasped it and I helped him stand up. "I'm not going to be able to sit on the toilet tomorrow," he complained, as he helped put the equipment back to its designated areas. He was a sweetheart, and always stayed around to help after class. Too much sitting is a problem for Americans anyway. "Trust me, I'm doing you a favor." "No. You're trying to kill me." I laughed and patted him on the back. "You love it." He tried to look contrite and said with a sigh, "You're right. It just hurts so bad." We laughed together, and I told him I would see him next week as I tended to the few kettlebells that were scattered in the back of the room. In the silence of the warehouse, I was left with my own thoughts. My assistant had offered to fill in for me tonight because all the drama that was going on in my personal life, but working out was my therapy. And I didn't want to sit at home alone, thinking about the inevitable. The inevitable found me anyway, in the form of my phone ringing, and I pointedly ignored it. I didn't want to talk, and I knew who the call was from. My phone beeped and I knew she'd left me a message. The she was my annoying big sister. I was slow about clearing up, before finally getting my bag and going to my car. I took my sweet time, and as I was pulling away, my phone notified me that I'd 5 new messages. "Gee sis. Calm your..."
Censored.
I said as I finally reached for my phone, as I pulled up to a stoplight. I quickly scanned my texts and rolled my eyes. The car behind me honked, and I realized I'd been so busy being annoyed with my sister Carrie that I hadn't seen the light change. Feeling passive-aggressive, I drove very slowly and put on my hazards. The bozo behind me leaned on his horn and sped past me, giving me the finger as he flew by. I waved and smiled at him as if I were the Queen of England. "Idiot," I mumbled. I turned off my hazards and drove at least 20 miles faster than the speed limit until I ended up in my ritzy neighborhood and slowed down, not wanting to get caught in any of the speed traps the local cops love to set up near the beginning of every month. They hadn't caught me yet, and I was determined to keep it that way. Pulling into my lot, I made my way to the gate separating me from my apartment courtyard. I scanned my key card at the entrance and made my way inside. It was a cheap apartment complex on the good side of town. My landlords were old rich people who refused to sell the property that was worth at least $2 million just for the property alone. Rumor had it that they didn't plan to sell ever. This complex was their baby, and as tenants, we treated the landlords better than their own kids. I stopped at my mailbox and was pulling out my mail when I heard the door behind me open. It was the landlord's great-grandson. He was acting as the handyman while on break from college. "Hey Cesar," I said as he closed the door behind him. "Hey Nikki. Some weirdo came looking for you today. Tall dude with a weird accent. Like straight-up hillbilly or something. Said something about your dad and how you needed to come back home. I didn't let him in. I figured if he knew you, then he could just call you." I sighed and nervously fingered my junk mail. "Thanks for not letting him in. That's my father's lawyer." "My late father's lawyer," I corrected. "Oh, Nikki. I didn't know your father had died. I'm so sorry." I shrugged. "Don't be. I'm sure not. Good night, Cesar. Tell your gran I said hi. I didn't wait for him to respond as I walked away towards my apartment door and shut out thoughts of the hillbilly and my father. The next morning, I awoke abruptly. Someone was banging on my door. Loud. Incessantly. Go away, I threw my covers off and stomped to the front door. Without even stopping to look through the peephole, I wrenched the door open and opened my mouth to shout at the person on the other end, only to see a pair of dark green eyes the same color as mine staring up at me. Hi, Auntie, said my 10-year-old niece. She smiled up at me sweetly, and I embraced her immediately. It was then that I saw my sister in a fully fledged fight with Cesar. She was poking him in the
censored
and looked ready to punch him. We both had anger issues, and she normally handled hers a lot better than I did. Apparently, today was the exception. Hey Mom, Tara said. Stop fighting with that guy. Auntie's right here. There you are, Carrie said huffily, glaring at me and then Cesar. She marched towards me. She had red hair like me and the same dark green eyes. She kept her hair long while I wore mine short in a no-nonsense bob. I was a personal trainer and didn't like to worry about my hair when I worked up a sweat. I didn't know you had your own security detail, she said sarcastically. You'd think you were royalty, that's how hard it was for me to get in here. Your landlord is like a version of the Secret Service. Why haven't you responded to any of my texts or phone calls? Are you avoiding me? Do you know how far I had to drive and pull Tara out of school, just to be sure you weren't dead too? I winced. Carrie wasn't known for her sensitivity. I looked at Tara, who seemed unbothered, which worried me. She was too much like us. Do you know this woman? Cesar demanded. She barged in here with that little girl, practically mowed down Mrs. Romsky and her dog. I suppressed a giggle at the image of my sister trampling over my ancient neighbor and her annoying Pomeranian, and said, Sorry for all the fuss, Cesar. This is my sister Carrie and my niece Tara. I would say nice to meet you, but I don't believe in lying, said Carrie nastily. Mom? Carrie? Stop being mean, Tara added, placing her hands on her hips. Now apologize. Looking contrite, my sister did as she was told. Sometimes I wondered who was raising who. Oh, and there's a big tall guy with us, kindly let him in too. He's wearing a cowboy hat. You can't miss him, said Carrie to Cesar, who grunted in reply. I ushered my sister and niece into my apartment. I was barely able to close the door before my sister started on me. God, that was a nightmare. Next time just answer your freaking phone, she yelled, catching herself at the last moment as to not swear in front of Tara. Tara giggled, clearly used to her mother's potty mouth. I've been busy. I sat down heavily, knowing that a lecture I didn't want to hear was on the horizon. Too busy to return my calls about your own dad's funeral? I glanced at Tara and said, Hey honey, why don't you go watch TV in my room? I need to have an adult conversation with your crazy mother. Tara shrugged in response and headed in the direction of my room. I waited until I heard her close the door before turning back to Carrie. I wish you wouldn't talk like that around her. Talk like what? Truthfully. I ignored her comment and said, You know I hate funerals and don't deal with death well. And I wasn't too fond of Pa either, so why should I have bothered to go? Because you need to forgive and move on. My face hardened. Some things, some people aren't worth forgiving. She opened her mouth to rebuff my statement when someone knocked sharply at my door. Come in. I yelled in exasperation, expecting Cesar to be standing there with Dad's lawyer. The door opened, and all the hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I saw the last person I ever thought I would see again. My entire body tensed and my blood pressure picked up. I could barely breathe, and it took all my focus to not faint right then and there. With a shaky voice I said, Brian? Chapter 2. What are you doing here? I asked, standing up from my chair and staring at him as if I hadn't seen him in a lifetime. It had been a decade since I'd seen him, and he hadn't aged at all. He looked the same. His dark brown eyes still caused my heart to flutter dangerously. His full lips were still my biggest temptations, and I had to stuff my hands in my pockets to stop myself from playing with the bit of hair that fell towards the front of his face, beckoning to push it back. He took off the cowboy hat he always wore and smiled cautiously at me. His smile made my heart skip a beat. I was still attracted to my husband. I mean ex-husband. Unfortunately, 10 years hadn't changed that. "Hi, Nikki," he said, approaching me hesitantly. I moved towards him at the same time, and we exchanged an awkward hug, the cowboy hat in his hand poking at my leg. When he let go of me, I immediately missed his warmth. He smelled the same. I guess he never changed his aftershave. While we'd been married, he'd grown a beard, and I couldn't help but remember the feel of his freshly grown stubble when he used to rub his face between my thighs. Startled by the direction of my own thoughts, I immediately grew defensive. "What are you doing here?" He frowned. I guess he figured 10 years would have taken the bitterness away. He was very wrong. "That's what I've been trying to tell you," Carrie said with annoyance in her voice. "If you don't want to go the funeral, fine. But your husband here." "Ex-husband," I said pointedly. "Whatever, he needs to sign off on all the property Dad left him in the will and—" "Dad left you property?" Carrie gritted her teeth. "Dad left everything to him. I guess he figured one ex-son-in-law to run things was better than 2 girls." I shook my head, not believing it. "Dad left you nothing? Are you kidding me? You've sacrificed everything to keep the ranch and he left you with nothing?" "Us? He left us with nothing." I could hear the anger in her voice, but more importantly, I could hear the hurt. Even from the grave, Dad was screwing us over. I was furious for my sister, not myself. I wanted nothing of my family's legacy. Dad had been
Censored.
a good old boy of the worst kind. In our small town, he'd been one of the main employers, so everyone bowed to his wishes, including my mother, who'd been the daughter of the mayor. I understood at an early age that she'd married my father for his money and position in our small town. And she'd paid dearly for her decision. My father hadn't been a good person, and his ways had driven her to misery, drinking her life away, dying from a heart attack when I was barely 14. "What a slap in the face," I muttered. "But that doesn't explain why you're here." Brian seemed uncharacteristically nervous as he said, "Isn't it clear? I'm here to sign the property over to you." "Me?" I said with surprise, "but I don't want it. That's Carrie's pride and joy, not mine." "I told you she would be difficult," Carrie interrupted. "I'm not being difficult. Your middle name should have been difficult. I don't even have a middle name." Okay, let's not fight, ladies." I cut him off before he could go any further. "Listen, I don't even know why you're here. I don't want the property. Sign it over to Carrie and we're done here. You can go and disappear back to wherever you came from, and I can get on with my life. Deal?" He looked at me in silence. And the way he looked at me was unnerving. I was so glad my sister was around. Like the joker she was, she took that moment to excuse herself. I gave her a dirty look, and she smiled back at me innocently. "You guys don't need me here. I'm sure you can settle this amongst yourselves." She disappeared into the bedroom with Tara. I stood there silently and heard the 2 of them laughing over something on television. Their laughter made me smile until I remembered my present company, and it quickly disappeared. I folded my arms. "I think we're done here, Brian. Nice to see you." He fingered his hat and said softly, "Sit down, Nikki. I'm not going anywhere until we talk." "I'm not sitting down, and you have nothing to say that I want to hear." "Colette?" "Don't call me that," I shouted. I didn't want to get riled up, but I was easily riled up. I had a short fuse. Nicolette was my full name and no one, absolutely no one called me that. But Colette had been his nickname for me, and it bothered me when he used it. "Don't you have something to do at that fancy new farm of yours? I guess you'd be too busy tending to business there to care about anything to do with my dysfunctional family." He looked pleased for a moment, and I was puzzled by his reaction to my question. So, you've been keeping tabs on me? I scoffed. Clay is a small town, Brian. You know, everyone in Clay was talking about it. Of course the news got back to me. He took that moment to sit, not bothering to respond. He settled back on my couch, making himself comfortable. I couldn't help but notice how manly and rugged he looked as he sat there, his muscular shoulders covered by his flannel shirt. He looked the same. If anything, he was even more attractive now than he had been 10 years ago when I'd last set eyes on him. Sit down, Nicky. Please, he said. He patted the space next to him, and I ignored his gesture and sat down on the futon across from him. What is it, Brian? Let's cut through all the BS. I know what you told my sister, but what do you really want? To sell the property? If so, you don't need my blessing to do it. After all, it's yours now. Brian shook his head. I have no interest in selling your childhood home. How thoughtful. He ignored my sarcastic tone. I know you don't have fond memories of the place, but Carrie loves it. I couldn't do that to her. So sign the property over to Carrie. Problem solved. Are we done here? I stood up then, and walked over to my door, opening it. He studied me. His dark eyes not giving anything away. I couldn't tell what he was thinking, but he didn't look too happy with me. Okay, I'll leave, he said, getting up. My eyebrows shot up in surprise. Wow, that was easy. But if you want me to sign that land over to your sister, I'm going to need something from you first. Something from me? I don't have anything anyone would want, besides that giant TV in my bedroom. I didn't understand what angle he was trying to work, but the look on his face showed he was very serious about what he was about to propose, something I found concerning. When Brian set his mind to something, it was nearly impossible to convince him otherwise. His expression didn't change. Humorless as usual, I thought to myself. I don't need a TV, but I do need to talk to you. He glanced towards the bedroom before saying, one-on-one when we don't have your family in earshot. I was confused. This was coming from the man who hadn't even sent me an email in 10 years. I had a witty comeback on the tip of my
censored
before he said, we have a lot to talk about. No, we don't. The way things ended between us. I held my hand up as if trying to stop the flood of words, before he said something we both regret. Us was a long time ago, Brian. I moved on. And I heard you did too. Rather quickly, in fact. Mr. Ladies' Man. I tried to sneer, hoping he didn't hear the catch in my voice as I thought about the rumors I'd heard about him dating other women. So many rumors, in fact, that I'd hightailed it out of town as soon as I could. Desperate to get away from my family, my vile daddy, and most especially rumors of my husband, ex-husband, whoring it up in town so freshly after our divorce. I was stupid, he conceded, I could tell grudgingly. I'm not going to argue with you there. But I had my reasons. My eyes narrowed and I was ready to launch into a full-out tirade, but maturity won and I made myself take deep breaths. Brian Hart wasn't going to get a reaction out of me. That's what he wanted. But I didn't care enough about him to get angry, at least that's what I was telling myself. Your reasons, huh? Well, maybe you can find a few more on the opposite side of my door. Get out. He didn't move. He just stared me down, and I tried to forget how many times over our relationship, if you could call it that, he'd given me that same look. We had been mismatched from the start. I was too stubborn to see reason, and he was too stubborn to give in. A match made in heaven? I think not. More like a match made in hell. He placed his hat on his head and said, You can play hardball all you want, Nicky, but you know I always get what I want. And I have the upper hand this time around. Excuse me? I said, placing my hands on my hips. The upper hand? I don't think so. I know so. If you want your sister to get the land, then it'll be on my terms. Your terms? I laughed derisively. What exactly are your terms? He shrugged. We talk. We clear the air. Oh, poor Brian wants closure. I guess all that fancy living has made you soft. We both know there's nothing soft about me, he said, and I knew 10 years ago a comment like that would have made me blush. But things were different now. I was different. This is the last time I'll say this, get out. I'm done. I was done 10 years ago. If you need closure, see a psychologist. I don't owe you anything. He nodded as if to himself and said, have dinner with me tomorrow. We'll talk, and then and only then will I sign the property over to your sister. I'll be in touch. And with those parting words he left. I slammed the door behind him. I was angry, but slamming the door was more for show and because it felt good to kind of get the last word. But I felt more confused than angry. What the hell was Brian trying to do? Seconds later, my sister sauntered out the bedroom. She sat down on my couch. Sue, how'd it go? He wants to have dinner with me tomorrow. She nodded. Sounds reasonable. I looked at my sister as if she were crazy. Reasonable? Going out to dinner with my ex is what you consider reasonable? She shrugged nonchalantly. I don't know. He's not so bad. Stop talking. But I. Just stop, I said, hushing her and sitting down heavily next to her. We sat there in silence, each lost in thought when she interrupted. The ranch is all I have. It means the world to me. I nodded, still silent. I would do anything for Carrie, and she'd proved many times that she would do anything for me. When my life had fallen apart, she'd been there to help me pick up the pieces. I guess I'm going to dinner tomorrow with Brian. She placed her hand over mine and squeezed it. Thanks, sis. I sighed. It's the least I can do. I owe you that much. She didn't respond. Instead, she glanced in the direction of where Tara was now laughing her head off at something on TV. You don't owe me anything. I stood up abruptly and cleared my throat. I needed to lighten the mood. There'd been too many feelings in my household for my comfort, and it wasn't even 9 o'clock in the morning yet. You know, how exactly does Brian think he'll contact me? He doesn't even have my number. Sure he does. What? I gave it to him. I planted my hands on my hips ready to tear Carrie a new one when she abruptly yelled out, Tara? Let's go. Give your auntie a hug. We need to get to the museum before the morning crowd gets there. I wanted to yell at Carrie, and she knew it too. She had a smirk on her face, knowing full well I would control my temper in front of Tara. I hugged Tara goodbye, and
censored
her forehead. Hey kid. Do me a favor, okay? She nodded excitedly. Sure, what? Drive your mom crazy for me. Consider it done, she said excitedly as she turned to leave. I glanced at my sister and gave her a broad smile. Have fun. I watched them leave, deep in thought. Brian was back in my life. I didn't know how I felt about that, even if it was only temporary. I closed my door with a sigh and made my way back to my bedroom. It was much too early for thinking, and so I laid down, closed my eyes, and tried to ignore all thoughts of a certain man with rich coffee-colored eyes. Chapter 3. I pulled up to the restaurant early and immediately regretted what I'd worn. I'm not sure what possessed me to wear a dress so short that I couldn't move an inch without worrying about flashing the person in front of me, behind me, and to the side of me. It made me feel as if I were trying too hard. And I had to admit, I was trying. It had been years since he last saw me. And when he'd showed up at my door a few mornings ago, I'd been wearing ratty old leggings, a t-shirt, and a scowl. I still was wearing the scowl, but I felt the need to redeem myself in the wardrobe arena. I'd definitely gone overboard. I swore at myself and then took a deep breath. I opened the door and stepped out, tugging the dress down as much as I could. I heard a whistle and gave a hostile glare towards the men who were staring in my direction. What are you looking at? I yelled in their direction while mumbling, you bunch of Neanderthals. Can't a man admire a beautiful lady anymore? Called one of the guys while the others egged him on. I rolled my eyes and walked away, determined to ignore the catcalls coming from them, but they couldn't take a hint. I could see the leader of the group coming in my direction, cheered on by his buddies. He fell into step next to me. "You need some company." "Not from you. You don't even know me. And I don't want to get to know you either. Why are you being such a cow?" I stopped instantly and turned to face him, but I needn't have bothered. In an instant, he was on the ground, pinned there with a cowboy boot holding him down by the neck. I hadn't even seen Brian appear. I'd only seen a flash of his hand where he'd punched the guy directly in his face, sending him flying to the ground. He looked upset, and the guy on the ground was now struggling to get Brian's foot off his face. His buddies didn't come to his aid, they just yelled obscenities. "Let him up before a cop sees you. I don't want to spend my evening bailing you out." Wordlessly, Brian did what I asked. The guy scampered away, his eyes wide and unbelieving. "You know I could have handled that, right?" "Next time," Brian answered, looking angry. "There won't be a next time. I plan to retire this dress as soon as dinner is over." It wasn't the dress that made him act like an a-hole. It was his lack of respect for women. I looked at Brian, surprised. "Well, you've evolved over the years." He grunted. "You make it sound like I was a caveman." "Well," I deliberately let my voice trail off as we approached the door. Brian automatically reached for it, opening it for me. I know I was a little rough around the edges, but I was nothing like that dude outside. I had to give him credit. He'd always been great towards me, and women in general. He was a gentleman. I was determined not to let him know how much I appreciated his interference, even though I was sure I didn't need him to come to my rescue. I said as much. "You know, you didn't have to come racing to my rescue. I could have handled myself." "I know. You've always gone to great lengths to show me you've never needed me." His comment caught me off guard, but before I could think of a rebuttal, the hostess smiled widely at us and escorted us to a booth towards the back of the crowded restaurant. We were at a local chain restaurant that specialized in barbecue and hamburgers. It was a casual joint that most tourists avoided, but the locals flocked to. This place reminds me of the type of restaurants we went to when we first started dating. I look around and couldn't help but smile. He was right. This was exactly the type of place we'd frequent. Small restaurants in little towns so no one would know we were dating. But that hadn't lasted long, I thought to myself. I cleared my throat as if it would also help clear my head that was filling up with memories of us, memories of what used to be, of what was abruptly ripped away from me. And with that, I felt the anger again. I had to remember the anger to get through the evening. I had to stay angry. Anger was the only emotion I could allow myself to feel in Brian's presence. Any other emotion would be way too dangerous. We ordered drinks, and he tried to engage me in idle chit-chat. I, of course, refused to partake. I largely ignored him and stared at the game that was broadcasting over his head. "So, is this what you plan to do for the rest of the night?" he asked, as a waitress sat our food in front of us. I gleefully ignored him and thanked the waitress. I bit into my hamburger and chewed thoughtfully. I hoped none of my students came in and saw me feasting. Most of them were vegans or on some version of an extreme diet. "Still have an appetite like a bear, I see." I grunted and took another bite. He stared at me, not touching his food, so I reached forward and helped myself to his fries like the glutton I was. "If you think ignoring me will get you anywhere, you're wrong. I'm not ignoring you. I'm enjoying a decent dinner, in questionable company." "Questionable? That's how you think of me?" "Actually, Brian, I don't think of you at all. But your first reaction upon seeing me was to throw yourself in my arms. I hugged you. You could have slapped me. There's still time for that." He laughed, and to my surprise, he reached across the table and placed his hand on mine. "You haven't changed at all." His voice was an easy drawl that did ridiculous things to my insides. Memories of how his voice used to cause my body to react flooded through my mind. I remembered so many nights when we were far apart, hearing his voice on the phone and getting turned on at the sound of it. I pulled my hand away and studiously ignored the look in his eyes, glancing instead up at the TV. I couldn't even tell you what teams were playing, even though I'd been watching for 20 minutes. That's how much his presence and voice had preoccupied me. Come on, Nicolette. Stop being such a wuss. Look at him. I forced my eyes to his, and immediately regretted it. I made my body to relax, bringing my arms up on either side of the booth. I hoped that I looked relaxed as I attempted to sound nonchalant. So about those papers? I'll sign them when I'm good and ready. He folded his hands together, and his muscular forearms were well displayed. God, the guy kept in great shape. I looked at his shoulders and his
censored,
not even being subtle. Like what you see, Nicky? Not too bad for an old geezer, I said flippantly, taking a drink of my soda. He laughed, and I couldn't help but smile. Nice to see you don't take yourself so seriously anymore. I've changed some. But probably not enough, I grumbled under my breath. You're probably right. I never did change fast enough for you. I nodded, my lips pulling tight. Adapting to change wasn't your strong point. He nodded. I had my flaws. Tons of them. You weren't Miss Perfect either. I laughed. I never pretended to be. But enough about the past. I need you to sign those papers. Are you dating somebody? I was tired of Brian catching me off guard, so I decided to play his game. Are you? Nope. So, you haven't met a special someone? I couldn't help my curiosity. Besides the first 6 months after we broke up, I knew nothing of his relationships over the past 10 years, and I was curious. I already had a special someone. I sighed, realizing I wasn't getting anywhere. What do I need to do to get you to sign the papers? Is talking to me that painful? I wouldn't admit it. But he was right. I thought I could handle seeing him again. Being around him. But I couldn't. I still felt like I'd traveled back in time and was still that open-mouthed teenager, enthralled by a man who I felt was out of my reach, more mature, knowledgeable. I just don't want to sit here and rehash our past or make small talk. I want those papers signed. I don't care about anything else. You could have an entire harem and I wouldn't care. I don't have a harem. I'm a one-woman man. Always have been. Always will be. I tried to change the subject. You haven't touched your food. Not hungry. Dinner was your idea. It seemed to be the only thing you'd agree to. Before I could say anything, he pulled off his cowboy hat and rubbed his hands through his hair. Nicky, you might not like what I have to say next, but I'm going to say it anyway. You've avoided me for the past 10 years, and now I finally have your attention. I don't plan to give it up anytime soon. I shook my head, not understanding what he wanted. What? You want your sister to have the property, then it'll be under my terms. And what are those terms? I raised a brow, genuinely curious about what would come out of his mouth next. You give me another chance. I hadn't been expecting that. Abruptly, I stood up and he stood up too, reaching out to stop me. Where are you going? You don't deserve another chance. You're right. I don't deserve another chance. We deserve a second chance. He met my eyes with his own. His dark gaze was steady, strong. It didn't take more than a second to determine that he meant every word. Brian didn't do guile. He meant what he was saying, and that scared me. I grabbed my purse and wordlessly walked away. I had to get away from him. It was all too much to process. I was feeling things that I'd buried deeply, unwelcome feelings that made me queasy. He tried to catch up with me, and almost collided with a waiter. Nicky, wait. I ignored him and quickly made my way to the exit, not bothering to care that we were making a scene. Despite my determined strides, Brian easily caught up with me. Get away from me, Brian. I didn't make eye contact as I pushed through the door being held open by the hostess from earlier, who looked at us with confusion before mumbling a customary, "See you again soon." Her voice faded off at the end, sounding doubtful, which would have been comical had I not been feeling so many emotions at once. Is it too much to ask? Just a few outings with me? Is that too much to ask? You want me to date you? I laughed hard bitterly, and when I was done his mouth was drawn in a tight line. Go ahead and laugh, but if you want the property to go to your sister, then yes, that's exactly what my terms are. 5 dates with me. What? I said incredulously. You're funnier than I remembered. I guess you have changed, not as much a stick in the mud. Do you see me laughing? I'm dead serious. And I could tell by the set of his jaw that he was telling the truth. My ex-husband wanted to date me. I don't know what type of sick joke this is, but I don't want any part of it. We were done 10 years ago, and we're done now. No, you were done 10 years ago. I never agreed. You signed the divorce papers, didn't you? I did what you wanted. You didn't even ask me what I wanted. Because you never gave me the opportunity to ask. And whose fault was that, Brian? I'm not taking all the blame for our failed marriage, so please spare me. I'm not blaming you. If anything, I'm asking for another chance. I was blindsided by everything. I narrowed my eyes at him, suspicious. Another chance? Why now? I never gave up on us, Nikki. You did. And I just want the chance to show you. To show me what? How easy it's going to be to walk away from me a second time. His eyes looked sad and I saw the shame there. Good. I wanted him to feel bad. If he felt even a tenth of the pain he'd caused me, then I could die a happy woman. I never wanted to leave, was his response after a long silence. But you didn't stay. He shook his head, then his expression changed as he studied me, not saying a word. I felt uncomfortable under his steady gaze, but still met his eyes head-on. A wry smile appeared on his face. Why do you have to be so ornery and stubborn? It's just in my nature. Come on, Nikki. Just 5 dates, and then I sign everything over to your sister. I know you hate me, so it's not as if you'll fall in love with me again. What does it hurt you to let me wine and dine you? I have no problem with wining and dining, I said, refusing to admit I did it every Friday evening from my couch. But I have a problem with being in your company. Come on, 5 dates and I'll walk out of your life. I'll leave you completely alone, never to bother you again. Seeing him standing there made me realize that I wasn't too sure how I felt about the prospect of him walking away again and never coming back. I thought I'd be ambivalent, but the thought of never seeing him again didn't sit too well with me. Not that I would ever admit it. 4 dates and you have a deal. He stuck out his hand. Let's shake on it. I reached out to take his hand, and he surprised me as he used that opportunity to pull me close to him. He lowered his head towards mine and said, by the first date you'll be begging for a 5th. You really put the
censored
in.
Censored.
I grumbled, pretending to be unaffected by his nearness. You say that as if it's a bad thing. And with that, he
censored
me hard on the mouth. And when I tried to pull away, he buried his hand in my hair and kept me from moving, deepening the
censored
until my body couldn't help but respond. I leaned against his
censored
and let him take complete control of the moment. He responded by parting my lips, and I felt his
censored
in my mouth. I must have moaned as he gripped my behind with his free hand, while he cupped my chin with the other, not relinquishing control of the moment or my body. And then abruptly, he pulled away. You taste as good as I remember. I'll see you Friday. Wear a dress. Another short one. He sauntered back through the door, probably to pay the bill. With shaky legs, I walked to my car and sat there, breathing in and out deeply. I leaned my head against the headrest and tried to settle my nerves, placing a hand over my lips that he'd just assaulted in a very good way. I turned the key and breathed deeply. What was I getting myself into? As I pulled away, I tried to clear my head and not read too much into what had just happened when my phone rang. I picked up without looking at the phone. I knew who it was without asking. So is he going to sign or what? I could picture her sitting there with her arms folded, waiting impatiently for my reply. He'll sign. She paused and then said, "And what's wrong with you? You're all out of breath." "Nothing. He'll sign. Just give me some time." I said goodbye to my sister, and realized as I almost ran a red light that I was driving way too fast, as if something were chasing me. I knew what that something was, but I wasn't interested in entertaining my past. Chapter 4. I stuck my feet into my shoes with more aggression than necessary. I was so angry. I couldn't believe Carrie and Tara had convinced me to go out with him. When I'd finally told Carrie about Brian's demands, she just shrugged it off. She made it sound as if I were a high school freshman, nervous about going on a date with a senior. But no, I was an adult, worried if I'd have enough emotional and physical control to get through a date with my still hot ex-husband. Carrie had called me chicken, telling me I was just scared. And she was right. I was scared. I couldn't keep my mind on anything when he was around. I was too aware of him, which made me feel self-conscious and ridiculous. It was like being a teenager again, but this time I told myself I would have the upper hand. At least I hoped I would. With that thought in mind, I pulled my sports bra down a little bit more so that even more cleavage was exposed. Brian was a
censored
man, and I was pretty sure that hadn't changed. I was wearing very brief shorts and just a sports bra. Brian had agreed to meet me at the park. He hadn't been too enthused, but I told him he could take it or leave it. Brian knew me well enough to know that I was strong-willed, and I was used to getting my way. So of course, he'd said yes. I figured if we were doing some sort of physical activity, like running, then I wouldn't need to talk to him. I laughed dryly to myself as I turned the car in the direction of the park. Physical activity when Brian and I were dating wasn't exactly fit for public viewing. I smiled at the memory, and then quickly became mad at myself. "Keep it together, Nikki," I told myself. "And get your mind out the gutter." I pulled up to the park where we were supposed to meet. Brian was easy to spot. He was the only guy leaning against his car, wearing jeans and a t-shirt instead of workout clothes. Typical, I couldn't help but think to myself. He watched me approach with a guarded look on his face. "When you said you wanted to meet at the park, I thought you meant like a picnic." "Really? Oh well. Ready to go run?" He looked down at his clothes. "Not exactly. I don't think I'm wearing the right clothes." I shrugged it off and started stretching. Not my problem. I started jogging, largely ignoring him as he attempted to keep up in his clearly uncomfortable cowboy boots. "How long exactly is this track?" He didn't sound winded yet, which annoyed me. 3 miles long." "Okay," he said with a positive tone I didn't like. "But I like to run the track at least twice." He grumbled something I couldn't hear. I'm sure he was not ecstatic about running 6 miles in cowboy boots and jeans, but it sounded like entertainment to me. It was only April and close to 90 degrees in Texas, so I wondered if he might pass out running in jeans. The thought of him passing out made me smile. After about a mile, he said, "Dang. You're just as mean and spiteful as I remember." "Oh no, I'm not. I'm much more so now," I said. I smiled sweetly and accelerated, knowing that he'd struggle to keep up with me. To my surprise, although his gait left much to be
censored,
he didn't really have any trouble keeping up with me. But I could tell by the set of his jaw and determined look that even if he were in pain, he wouldn't let on. When we got to mile 3, my
censored,
to be a decent human being won out over my
censored,
to make my ex-husband miserable, and I slowed down to an easy walk. "Done already?" he said, arching his brow at me. I shrugged and picked up my pace. "I figured your feet were killing you, cowboy." They were, but I'd have rather had huge blisters and bleeding feet than admit that I was in pain to you. "And you think I'm stubborn?" "Well, Stubbornness was a quality we both possessed, and it got us into this mess. I beg to differ, I said, looking at him sharply. Your refusal to sign the papers is what got us into this mess. He shook his head. I'm not talking about this agreement. I'm talking about our divorce. I'm not talking about that. So, what are you going to do, Nikki? Pretend it never happened? I shrugged, not knowing what to say. We walked in silence, each of us lost in thought. I glanced at him briefly when we passed under a streetlight that was finally turning on as dusk approached. His shirt was wet. I could see the sweat across the neck and down the
censored.
I noticed then that his
censored
and arms, his whole upper body, was bigger than I remembered. He was more muscular now, manlier, and I didn't even know it was possible for Brian to be even manlier than he already was. He caught me staring and gave me a knowing look. My shoulders stiffened waiting for him to make a comment, but when none came, I felt myself relaxing. Maybe this outing wouldn't be so bad. Brian? Nikki. Oh my God. Hi. Apparently, I'd spoken too soon. I couldn't help but grimace as I faced the woman now standing in front of us with a wide grin on her face. Well, aren't you two a sight for sore eyes? She said before throwing herself at us and embracing us in a warm yet awkward hug. Myra. Hi, great to see you, I mumbled, feeling anything but. Myra was an undying romantic, and the main reason Brian and I had been able to see each other right under Pa's nose. She'd owned the ranch near my parents' home before she sold it about 5 years earlier. There'd been a small patch of trees on her land that blocked off a small creek, which fast became a secret tryst location for us. I had a feeling Myra had known the whole time, but went out of her way to keep our secret. I'm so delighted to see you two back together. Soulmates. Together again. She happily clapped her hands together, and her wide smile accentuated her double chin. Her round blue eyes shone in happiness while she kept her body moving, swaying her arms back and forth as she walked in place. I didn't have the heart to tell her that we weren't back together, but apparently, Brian didn't have the same hang-ups. We're still divorced. No. Myra said as if the mere thought was distasteful. You guys were meant to be together. Nikki seems to think otherwise, Brian said. I rolled my eyes. I know otherwise. Myra shook her head at me. You've always been a difficult one, Missy. I wanted to tell her that it was all Brian's fault, but I didn't want to sound petty. It annoyed me, though, that so many people readily believed I was the one to blame for our failure of a relationship. I swallowed my words before they could escape. I guess I wasn't blameless, but I'd never admit it. I played a role in our relationship's demise, but Brian played a bigger one. I wondered what he would say if asked why our relationship fell apart. I'm sure he'd blame it on me too. Well, it's so good to see you two together again. She winked at me. Even if you're not really together again. She giggled and grabbed us again in a sweaty group hug. Gotta run. Or walk. These calories won't melt themselves, you know. And with that she powered past us, humming to herself. Myra was always a little quirky, Brian said when she was out of earshot. Yep. But a sweetheart. I shrugged and then felt bad. I gave her a hard time as a teenager, but you're right. She's a nice lady, always has been. I was just a terrible teen. That's true. I smiled as I slugged him in the shoulder. Whatever, Brian. You married that terrible teen. She was irresistible, still is, maybe even more so, he said softly. I didn't know what to say, so I stayed silent. He didn't try to engage me in conversation for the last quarter mile of our walk. He seemed to be lost in his own thoughts as well. We finally approached the parking lot, where only a few cars remained. There was a lot of activity in front of us, and I looked for my car, confused. The police were idling about, which was highly unusual. A tow truck was there. What's going on? Where's my car? I said, turning in a circle. I placed my hands on my hips, and that's when I saw it. My car. Or rather what was left of my car, crushed into almost nothing under a pickup truck. "My car," I yelled. And without missing a beat, Brian said, "Well, I guess I'll be taking you home." I glared at him. He seemed a little too happy with tonight's turn of events. Chapter 5. I can't believe that.
Censored.
Hit me, I said for what must have been the 100th time. Brian simply listened, but didn't bother to respond. He kept his eyes forward as he pulled up in front of my apartment complex. I was so angry, I turned on Brian. "Nothing. You're just going to sit there and say nothing?" My southern accent deepened when upset, so my rant came out as a drawl. He shrugged nonchalantly, which served to make me angrier. "I thought you were just venting. I thought women didn't like men to interrupt while they're venting." "Still a
Censored.
pig, I see," I growled at him. I knew I was being unfair and mean, but I didn't care. I was angry. My car had been totaled by a drunk idiot. The idiot in question had fully backed over my car and didn't even notice until a cop pulled him over. I'd wanted to strangle him, but Brian had held me back. If I'd known I was going to be a punching bag tonight, I would have worn something more comfortable. I opened my mouth to yell at him, and then promptly closed it. Wasn't that my main problem? Always blaming other people for my own issues? I gulped back the vitriolic words I'd on the tip of my
Censored.
and instead found myself apologizing. "Sorry. I'm just mad. I shouldn't have yelled at you. I get it. You haven't had the best week. Between your dad dying, me showing up, and your car getting totaled by a drunk idiot, I get that you're angry. I would be too." Tension seemed to release from my body at his words, and I only realized then that I'd been clenching my fists. "Well, thanks for the ride." I pushed the door open and jumped down from Brian's pickup truck. It was dirty and reminiscent of the 1980s. I'd heard Brian was doing well, so he could certainly afford something better, but he was a simple man. He wasn't the type to spend money on anything unnecessary just because he could afford it. I went to reach for my phone when I realized it had been crushed in the car. God damn it. "What?" I groaned and sat back down. I covered my eyes and said, "My phone." "Did you leave it?" "Yes. In my car." "Oh, I thought you just stuck it in your bra while you ran." I shook my head. "I don't run with it in my bra. I heard that gives you
Censored.
cancer." "Huh?" "Nothing." I knew I was sounding crazy and I didn't want to make things worse. I could feel Brian staring at me. I motioned to get up and out the car when he said, "You can take my phone for tonight." I turned around to look at him. "What?" "Take my phone." "I can't do that. It's unsafe for you to spend the night without a phone. Unless you have a landline?" "What am I? 80? Of course I don't have a landline." He reached into his pocket, retrieved his phone, and stuck it in my hand. "Take it." "No." "Take it." "No." "Well, at least call your sister and tell her what happened." I knew he was right, so I grudgingly took his phone. I proceeded to call my sister when the telltale sign of a phone without charge sounded, and the phone lay dead in my hand before my sister could even answer. Brian and I looked forlornly at the phone. Tonight is just not my night. It just needs to charge. I looked around at his truck and became irritated by the lack of a charger. Why do you insist on driving a truck with such ancient technology? Trust me, I do it just to bother you. I stuck my
Censored.
at him and he laughed. With a sigh and before I could regret it, I said, "Come on in. I'll charge your phone for you, call my sister, and then give it back to you." "Sounds like a plan." I stepped out of the truck and waited for him to join me on the sidewalk in front of my apartment. He took his time to swing out of his truck. He lazily walked towards me, wearing his cowboy hat again low on his face. In the moonlight, he looked even more handsome. The way the light shone on his face emphasized his cheekbones. My eyes couldn't help but drop down to his full lips. I remembered those lips, and I struggled against my impulse to
Censored.
him again. I folded my arms across my
censored,
hoping that my
censored,
weren't standing to attention against my shirt. I was already getting wet at the thought of Brian's,
censored,
and that angered me, but there wasn't anything I could do about it. I'd always been fiercely attracted to Brian, and divorce clearly hadn't changed anything. Instead of hiding my checking him out, I boldly let my gaze wander over him. His broad,
censored,
his thick muscular forearms, and those wide shoulders that I used to think could carry the world. His narrow hips clad in jeans that did nothing to hide the fact that Brian was a working man. He wasn't thin and suffering from bird legs like most men who pumped iron in the gym. No. Brian was gorgeous. A real man who kept his body looking great by performing physical labor all the time. He didn't comment about my staring, but as he strode over to me, I sensed that he wanted me to notice him. His walk was borderline arrogant, self-assured. And he'd every right to be. He was a fine-looking man. Not saying a word, I led him to my apartment. I was aware of the view he had of my bottom as he followed behind, could feel him staring at it, and I secretly thanked God for all the squats I'd done over the years that kept my
censored
in fantastic shape. When we arrived at my door, I bent down and found my replacement key. My wallet and regular pair of keys had been crushed in the car. I leaned towards the door and shoved the key in the lock, but it wouldn't turn. Come on, damn it. Turn. Stupid key. Need some help? Brian asked as he leaned in, his breath caressing my ear. My whole body went still at his nearness and I whimpered out, yes. He slid up behind me, close enough so that his
censored
was against my back, and he placed his hand over mine, helping me to guide the key back in the lock, and exerting just enough pressure that it finally turned in the right direction. Thanks, I said, kind of out of breath and hoping he hadn't noticed. His nearness really was a drug. I felt heady, loopy, turned on, and all he did was stand close enough for us to touch. I pushed my door open, and he removed his hat as he entered. Always a gentleman, I thought wryly to myself. God, that whole cowboy gentleman thing was irresistible. I tried to control my thoughts, telling myself that I was being ridiculous, when I felt him behind me. I knew that I shouldn't have invited him in. As I turned away from him to lock the door, I felt his hand at my waist, turning me around, drawing me to him. I went willingly and sighed as he
censored
my neck slowly, trailing his mouth from right below my ear to my collarbone. I gasped and felt myself growing wetter. As his mouth grazed my earlobe, I realized his hands were already freeing my
censored
from my sports bra. He easily pulled it away from me, gazed at my
censored. This scene has been censored to provide a safe and enjoyable reading experience for everyone.
He turned me around then, and I found myself suddenly feeling shy, not wanting to look at him. He'd been in town less than a week, and I'd already let him inside me. I didn't know what I was thinking. I had a problem. I wanted him too bad. I got to get up early. You should leave, I said unceremoniously. I wanted to be alone with my thoughts, and I knew the longer he stood there looking like the world's
censored
man, the more I wouldn't allow him to leave without having
censored
with him several more times. I had some dignity. I think. You're kicking me out? His brown eyes were incredulous. No, I'm inviting you to leave. So then I can voluntarily stay. No. You sure about that? He asked, touching my face, trailing a finger down the side of my cheek. And my body shook, clearly showing that I wasn't done. Let me return the favor, he said. And I was unprepared as he picked me up and laid me on the couch. What? Wait. What are you doing?
This scene has been censored to provide a safe and enjoyable reading experience for everyone.
Still want me to leave? I narrowed my eyes at him, determined to not give in, again. I think that would be best, I managed to say with a shaky voice. I hoped that he hadn't noticed the indecisiveness in my tone. I expected him to argue with me, but he didn't. He stared at me for a second longer than I was comfortable with, making me look elsewhere to break the eye contact that made me feel more vulnerable than the
censored
we had just shared. He stood up and pulled on his underwear and jeans. I missed his
censored
body as soon as he covered it. He picked up his hat, which I hadn't even realized had ended up on a lampshade, and said, "I'll see you tomorrow night." I thought he was going to
censored
me or in some way try to touch me, but he didn't. He just walked to the door and opened it. "Be sure to lock this when I leave. Can't trust these city folks." And with that he was gone. I waited a few seconds, and then with wobbly legs, exhausted from stretching in unimaginable ways, I got up and locked the door. I shook my head to myself. I didn't know how I planned to sleep tonight. Chapter 6. I had
censored
with Brian. We were sitting at McDonald's, and Tara had gone to the bathroom, leaving us adults with a few seconds to chit-chat. Knowing Tara would come back soon, there were no preamble to my words. For no apparent reason, I felt guilty about what I'd done with Brian. And of course, I confessed to my sister. She was, after all, my best friend. My confidant. She'd been more of a mother to me than my own mom who'd passed away prematurely. Carrie was my half-sister from my father's first marriage. In fact, it had been Carrie's grandmother that had left the land to our father. Carrie's mother had never been a part of Carrie's life. I knew nothing about her, and it seemed Carrie knew very little as well. All we knew was that our father treated us equally, like crap. And apparently, he'd extended his mistreatment beyond the grave, by deliberately writing Carrie out his will. He hadn't left me anything either, but I hadn't expected anything. Huh?
censored
I hissed at her, mad that I'd to repeat myself. With Brian? Yep. Well, I'm sure you've done that a million times before, so I'm not too sure what the big deal is. I rolled my eyes and sighed deeply. I wish you would take this a bit more seriously. She shrugged her shoulders. I am taking this seriously. I'm just not surprised. Wow. Thanks for that, Carrie. She looked at me with amusement, unbothered by my cranky mood. You and Brian could barely keep your hands off each other 10 years ago, so I'm not sure why you expected things to be any different now. She had a point, but I like to think that an older, wiser, more mature version of my former self could resist Brian's charms. Clearly, I was wrong. I didn't get a chance to rebuff her words because Tara chose that moment to reappear. She was a welcome distraction. I could count on her not to bring up Brian. "So where are you going on your next date?" she said. I stared at her and then shot Carrie a glare. She tried to look innocent. "It's not really a date." "I'm okay then," Tara said as if I were insane. "It's not," I insisted, I said, feeling silly for arguing with a 10-year-old. She nodded sagely. "Okay then, what else do you call it when two people go out together?" "We're just chilling, hanging out, whatever you young folks call it." Tara laughed and I groaned while covering my eyes. God, did I just say that? Boy, did I feel old. When I uncovered my eyes, Carrie was looking at me trying to hold back a smile. "How about we change the subject?" "Okay," I said happily. "How's the new car search going?" "It sucks." "Nothing good?" "You should get a fancy red car." "A sports car? A Porsche or Lamborghini?" Tara said, cutting into the conversation. "What do you know about Porsches or Lamborghinis?" "I know they're cool." I shook my head, amused. "You're too much." "Isn't she though?" Carrie said, roughing up Tara's hair. "Mom," she whined, swatting at her hand. I watched them together and felt a touch of envy. They were a family, and maybe that was something I'd never experience. I cleared my mind of all thoughts and realized that the person I least wanted to see was coming through the door. "Hi, Brian." Tara called to him cheerfully. I groaned inwardly and shot Carrie a look. "What?" she said, holding her hands up defensively. "I didn't invite him." I didn't believe her, but realized that Brian looked just as surprised to see me as I him. His eyes were guarded as he approached, and I tried not to show that I was highly uncomfortable, but I was. He pulled up a chair and sat down on it, straddling it as he hung his arms over the side. "Hi, Tara." How's school coming along? It's spring vacation. I wish us grown folks got vacation. You do. It's called being an adult. We all laughed at her unexpected comment. Carrie said casually, Tara and I have to head out. You should take Nikki car shopping, Brian. It's not as if she has anything else to do. What? No. You're supposed to take me, I protested, standing up. Can't. I'm just so busy with Tara being out of school and all. I knew she was lying, and if she'd been sitting down, I would have kicked her under the table. Too bad both Tara and Brian were there. They said their goodbyes and made their way to the door, both smiling mischievously. I kept my eyes glued on them, trying to ignore the man sitting near me, silently watching me for any sign of trouble. So, what are you doing here? Stalking me? Pretty sure McDonald's is fair game. How convenient. For me, yep. He changed the subject, saying, How's everything going with your car? It had been a few days since the accident, and I honestly hadn't done much. I hated car shopping, and I said as much. Want some help? From you? Wouldn't that be like the second time you've come to my rescue in the past few days? No thanks. I don't mind being your knight in shining armor. Really? That's funny because rescuing me hasn't ever been your strong point. I could tell my words hurt him, and I instantly regretted them. I could be an unforgiving joker, but even for me, my words were a new form of low. He shifted away from me, as if needing to distance himself. I felt terrible, but had no idea how to make it better. He took off his ever-present cowboy hat and started to play with the edges. I was surprised. Brian never fidgeted. Apparently, I'd hit a nerve. So, you're just going to drive that rental indefinitely. Kind of expensive, isn't it? He didn't look at me as he waited for an answer. He just stared down at his hat, continuing to play with it between his large hands. He leaned his elbows on the table, waiting for me to answer, not bothering to look up at me. God, I felt so guilty that I'd hurt him, no matter how true my words had been. I was grateful that he decided to change the subject. He was right. Even though my insurance company was paying for some of the rental, it was still going to cost me more than I wanted to pay. I guess I should go out and get another car. Just the thought of it gives me anxiety. If you had just been driving a 1980s pickup truck, this would have never happened. You're right. Every day, it would have been a miracle if it even started. I felt a smile creep up on my face, and finally he stopped fidgeting and looked at me. There was amusement there, but also a vulnerability I don't ever remember seeing when we were together. Low blow. Old Betsy is a great truck, he said, smiling, though now there was only amusement in his eyes. Old Betsy? What is she? A golden girl? Ha. Ha. I bit back a smile. I loved teasing him. That was something else that hadn't changed between us. If I let you take me car shopping, can we consider it a date? He looked ready to argue, but saw the stubborn set of my jaw and decided against it. Smart man. It's a deal. We shook on it, and he held my hand a little too long. But more disconcerting is that he held my eyes. I saw,
Censored.
There in warmth. The first made me nervous and the latter made me downright scared. God, I was falling for my ex. Again. Go ahead and get something to eat. I'll return the rental car and meet you at my place. Deal? Sounds good to me, he said, pushing away at the table. See you then. He walked away from me and got in line. I breathed a sigh of relief when I was back in the car. I gave myself a stern lecture as I drove back to my place. Don't have
Censored.
with him, Nikki. Don't. Just erase all
Censored.
thoughts of you and Brian from your mind. Okay. Stop thinking about his body. Stop thinking about the way he licked your. I shook my head. Even when I was giving myself a firm talking to, thoughts of Brian messed up all my self-lecturing. I was still in my car fighting with myself when Brian drove up. Embarrassingly enough, I didn't notice him until he tapped on the window, and I wondered how long he'd been standing there watching me do nothing but blab to myself. From the smile on his face, I would guess he'd been there long enough. "Shut up. Don't say anything, just drive," I growled, sliding into the car next to him. "Yes, ma'am." To my surprise, it wasn't nearly as dreadful as I expected. I knew what kind of car I wanted, and the car salesman didn't dare hassle me. I figured it was because of Brian's stoic presence. They tried to crack jokes, Brian ignored them. They tried to engage him in conversation, Brian grunted. He was the perfect wingman. After dealing with Brian's version of a stony caveman, the salesmen were practically delirious to talk to me. A few hours later, the entire process was done. Happy, I high-fived Brian. That whole good cop bad cop act had them going. "Thanks." "No problem," he said. "But next time you play bad cop." "Fun. Good idea." He laughed then for the first time that afternoon, and I was shocked at how warm it made me feel inside. I'd forgotten how happy being in his presence made me. "Are you going to invite me in?" "Not after what happened the other night." "What if I promise to be on my best behavior?" He looked at me knowingly. "Or is it really my behavior you're worried about?" I hated being challenged, and that was exactly what he was doing. I looked at him with what I hope was a steely gaze. "You're not that tempting." "Really? You had me fooled." "Okay," I said. "This date is over." "Chicken. You're not going to get under my skin that easy, Brian." "We'll see." He surprised me then by crossing the distance between us. He stopped just inches from me, and I didn't know what to do. So I just stood there waiting to see what he would say or do next. He reached out and tilted my chin so I could see clearly into his eyes. He bent down and
censored
me so delicately, so softly. It was different from the hard and fast coupling just a few days before. His gentle soft
censored
made me feel special yet vulnerable. And I found myself not yearning for his body, but yearning to be held by him. I just wanted him to put his arms around me and tell me that everything would be fine. I felt open, vulnerable, exposed. And as he traced my lower lip with his thumb, wiping away the feel of his
censored
and replacing it with the delicate touch of his finger, I felt a shiver go down my spine. His dark eyes met mine. "Cold?" "Maybe," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Let me warm you." He bent down again, and this time his
censored
was harder, as if he were staking a claim and I was his prize and he wanted the world to know it. He pressed his mouth against mine and brought my lower body up against his own. I could already feel his member pressing between my legs. I wanted him to keep going and to never stop, and the thought brought me spinning back to reality. I was making out in the parking lot of my apartment complex with my ex. A man whose guts I hated. Right? I hated Brian. Yes, I forced my brain to agree. I hate him. With that, I pushed my hands against his
censored
breaking the
censored.
He looked down at me, clearly confused. "You okay?" he asked, concerned, and attempted to stroke my cheek. I caught his hand and then let it go. I stepped back. "I'm not doing this again. If you think you're going to get me back in bed, you're sorely mistaken. You know it's more than that. I want a lot more than that." He reached down again and
censored
me, this time bringing one hand to the small of my back and pulling me closer. His lips were gentler this time as they moved over my own. My eyes closed, and I just let myself enjoy the feel of his lips as they caressed my own. The gentleness of his
censored
did things to my body, but also I realized this easy familiarity between us was a falsehood. This was just
censored.
And that had always been the easy part, hadn't it? Bitterly, I pulled away from him. "That's enough of that." "You're sure?" he asked huskily. "Very," I said, taking a step back, knocking his hand off the small of my back in the process. Immediately, I missed the warm, possessive feel of it, which bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I narrowed my eyes, the lightness of the mood gone, because now I was cranky. Why was Brian Hart still getting under my skin? I turned away from him, deep in thought as I headed to the gate. He didn't follow me, and when I reached the other side of the gate, I turned to look behind me, and as I predicted, he was stood there watching me. I gave him a little wave goodbye. I knew my wave had been more dismissive than I intended, but I was preoccupied. I had a lot on my mind, and being around Brian made things confusing. More confusing. Brian wasn't the man I used to know. At least for my sake, I hoped he wasn't. Clearly, against my better judgment, I was falling for him again. Chapter 7. Would you like to see my property? His question came from nowhere. We were officially on date 4, and I was so caught up dealing with my rekindled feelings for Brian that I was pretty much operating on autopilot, just trying to get through the date so that I could go home and be done with this whole mess. I figured if I could get some time away from him, I could get over my unexpected emotions. And honestly, I was really scared. So scared that he'd know something was wrong, that he'd somehow guess things had changed between us, or at least for me. I knew it would give him an upper hand, and that worried me. And what was worse, I found myself suddenly shy around him. After my revelation that I still had feelings for him, I was beginning to feel self-conscious. I wasn't used to feeling like that since I was a teenager, and tried to shake it off, but his continual presence simply didn't allow it to happen. The idea of going on a road trip with him to see his property not only didn't appeal to me, but made my stomach turn. Hours alone with Brian? No, that would be trouble. I couldn't hide my feelings from him forever, but I could hold out until the end of this date. At least I hoped I could. I heard from my sister that Brian's property was at least 100 miles from my father's, but not too far from the city. It was near the mountains. I hadn't spent any time out there, given I'd never really felt comfortable in the country. As soon as I was old enough, I'd move to the city. I liked the night activity, having a reliable internet connection and Starbucks. I didn't like being surrounded by nothing but ranches and agriculture. That had been another disagreement between myself and Brian, I thought with a wistful sigh. In fact, we hadn't agreed on much of anything. If we'd spent less time jumping into the sack and more time talking, our marriage probably wouldn't have ended so badly, I thought to myself for the first time. That realization gave me an idea. And as a result, I found myself responding to Brian's invitation with, "Sure." If we had to spend hours in the car together, we'd be forced to talk. I wouldn't have to worry about being tempted to jump his bones. I mean, we weren't that young anymore. I hoped I could control myself. The first hour into the drive passed pretty unremarkably. We made idle chit-chat while I studied the landscape around us. It was gorgeous. The rolling hills seemed to come from nowhere as we traveled deeper into the countryside. The houses went from rows of suburban cookie-cutter homes that all looked alike to houses sparsely sprinkled across a landscape of rolling hills. Everything was so green, so hilly. It was the opposite of the flat, unremarkable landscape where I'd grown up. I found myself imagining what it would be like to live out there in the mountains. Going for runs every day would be a lot more inspiring, I thought to myself. Beautiful, isn't it? He caught me off guard again, lost in thought before he spoke. Yeah. I didn't know places like this existed in Texas. He smiled. Me neither. The view is a lot better than the one I had growing up, that's for sure. I laughed, remembering Brian's history all too well. He'd been raised by his grandfather, in a trailer park in a rough area of the city. He'd wanted to get out to experience the country, as much as I'd wanted to escape the country to experience the city. His views from the window of his grandfather's trailer had included drunken fistfights, illicit dealings, and the occasional dogfight. Not the best environment to raise a child, but his kind grandfather had done his best with very limited resources, and I respected that. Eventually, the hills became mountains, and I attempted to stretch my neck to see the majesty of it all. Now this is something. My voice trailed off as we started up a mountain, circling dangerously close to the edge of the road. As if feeling my discomfort, Brian didn't take his eyes off the road, reassuring me with, "Trust me. I've taken this road 1,000,000 times before. I could drive it with my eyes closed. Please don't do that." He laughed, making me smile, and I felt less afraid and more curious as I looked down towards the area below us. Dark green trees covered it, and I realized that this was probably one of the most beautiful places I'd ever seen in my life. We pulled off onto a dirt road and started to meander our way there. Trees lined our path, and I looked around in awe of the nature surrounding us. "It's about 30 minutes up the road," he said, and I nodded. I rolled down the window and stuck my head out. "This is paradise, Brian." "I know," he responded quietly. "You want me to pull over so you can take pictures?" No, keep going. I'm just enjoying the view. I'll commit it to memory." I wanted to tell him that I was enjoying more than the view. I was enjoying the moment. I was enjoying just being around him, and I don't think it would have mattered that I was surrounded by paradise or not. Just being around Brian made me feel more alive than I'd felt in years. And that was the truth I hadn't wanted to admit to myself. My love for Brian was a part of me, and when he was no longer in my life, that part of me never disappeared. I just buried it as deeply as possible, knowing that the pain of losing him made me incomplete, but I'd been unable to do anything about it. Our relationship had been severed by my own doing, and so I'd withdrawn into myself, not seeking out love again because that part of me, the part capable of deep romantic love, belonged to Brian. The moment he'd walked through my apartment door, I'd felt whole again. And I hadn't even realized until now what had been missing from my life. I'd buried the hurt, pushed through it, and moved on with my life. But emotionally, I'd still been raw from disappointment and heartbreak. I was so deep in thought, he startled me when he began talking again. "Could you imagine living out here?" "Out here?" I looked around and smiled widely. "Maybe. I think." He laughed. "Too much of a city girl now to even consider it, huh? You know, I've never been a fan of the country. But this isn't the country. This is paradise. I reckon this is what the Garden of Eden looked like." "So you have your own slice of Eden?" "Sure do," he said proudly. "Who does that make you?" "Adam?" He took his eyes off the road briefly and smiled. "That's right. Adam. And if you play your cards right, I might just let you be Eve." I struggled to hold back a smile. "Eve? Only if you're lucky." "Not sure that's the type of luck I want." "Any luck that involves me, Nikki, is the only type of luck you want." I laughed hard, deeply amused. "You're still so sure of yourself, aren't you, Brian?" He laughed too. "I wouldn't be me otherwise." He smiled at me, and I found myself smiling back. God, how I'd missed him and his self-assured attitude. He never had a problem with confidence. In fact, he believed in himself and had a knack for inspiring confidence in others. He'd been strong and influential in ways my father could only dream of. My father went out of his way to tear others down. He belittled them, made them feel like crap to feel better about himself. But Brian had been the opposite. In fact, the first time I'd noticed him had been when he'd stood up to my dad, who had been going off on his usual tirade, insulting the workers as he did almost daily. Brian, though fresh from the city, and a lot tougher than Dad would ever admit, had put my father in his place. I'd never forget that day. It had been glorious. "I know you boys barely speak any English, but you gotta be just plain stupid to not be able to follow the directions I gave you. My pigs could have done better." I'd been sitting behind a tree, trying to work through a difficult math problem when I'd heard my dad's words. I was used to his insults. He insulted anyone within earshot. My dad's very presence was offensive to most people, not that I could blame them. But I hadn't been expecting Brian's response. "Then maybe you should have hired pigs then," he said, without a hint or sarcasm in his voice. A few of the guys snickered. Most of the crew were Mexican, and my dad never let them forget it. He wasn't just a nasty person, he was a
censored
Dad's eyes had narrowed, and he'd marched over to Brian. I set my book down quietly and peeked around the tree, trying to see more of the action without Pa spotting me. "I don't know who you think you are, boy, but if you want to keep your job, then you better keep your stupid mouth shut." I grimaced, knowing Pa was just getting started. "Last time I checked, my mouth didn't take no IQ test, so it can't really be stupid, but I need this job, so I'll pretend that what you said was really clever and smart. That's what you want me to do, right? That way you feel like the boss?" My mouth dropped open at Brian's response. No one besides Carrie ever stood up to my father. And standing up to him had landed her into tons of trouble. My dad had grabbed Brian by his shirt, and even though my dad was at least 6 feet 5 inches and weighed more than 300 pounds, Brian didn't look concerned. He looked bored even. He clearly wasn't afraid, and just like that my father released him and took a step back. I expected his face to be covered with anger, but instead I saw something else in my father's eyes that I couldn't identify. Later, I'd know what I'd seen was grudgingly given respect. He looked at the rest of the crew and said, "Fix this mess. The rest of you can learn something from this city boy, and grow some balls." He ambled away, laboriously. His knees had always been bad. But then he abruptly turned around and said, "Hey, city boy." "Yeah," Brian said with a resolute look on his face. I fully expected my dad to fire him then. "You're in charge." With that, my dad had walked away. In that moment, Brian had gained my father's respect and my teenage adulation, which would eventually turn to something so much more. "What are you thinking about, over there? You've gone awfully quiet," Brian said, interrupting my memories. "Just thinking about how you've always been so arrogant and mouthy." "Hey, I grew up tough and fast, you know that. I had to fight for everything I wanted." "But you didn't fight for us," is what I wanted to say, but I held those words back. He looked at me questioningly when I didn't have a smart comeback, and I scrambled to sound like my usual self when a house came into view. It was a restored farmhouse, easily 4,000 square feet. And behind it were greenhouses as far as my eyes could see. From what I could tell, Brian had carved himself a little bit of paradise in the mountains, and I was impressed. "This is all yours?" He nodded, finally seeming humble. "Blood, sweat, and tears, as they say. All of it went into making this happen. I thought you just had a farm like my dad's. This is a freaking incredible operation, Brian. Even I can tell just by looking at it from the outside. If you're impressed now, just wait until you see the inside." He sounded so excited, like a little kid showing off his birthday presents. I couldn't help but feel excited too. I was happy for him, and excited to see what he'd built for himself. I knew that what he said would be true. Brian never did anything halfway. He put his whole heart into a project when he wanted it to succeed, and clearly he'd succeeded. And that made me sad as well, because the one aspect of his life that he hadn't succeeded in had been marriage. It brought back bitter feelings, as I started to think yet again, that he'd given up on us too easily. He just walked away. I'd been the catalyst that led to the end of us, but he hadn't done anything to stop me. I was the one challenge in his life that he'd walked away from, and it hurt. It made me feel like I'd felt all those years ago, that he hadn't wanted us enough. As he parked the car, I tried to bury the feelings as I'd done so many years ago. He came around the side of the car and opened my door for me. I smiled but avoided his eyes, not wanting him to read my emotions as he always had so easily. "You okay?" he asked, taking my hand in his as he helped me out the car. Always the gentleman, I thought yet again. "Fine, great. Why wouldn't I be?" I said, giving him a false smile as he attempted to study my face. "No, something's wrong. You're not all right." He looked concerned and he reached out to touch my face. I knocked his hand away. Must be the altitude doing funny things to my brain. "I'm fine." I realized he still held my hand. I pulled away from him and started walking in the direction of the greenhouses. "Let's get this show on the road. You owe me a tour." "We don't have all day," I said, marching away hoping that I hadn't given the true nature of my feelings away. Chapter 8. An hour later, I was seated at the granite island in his rather luxurious yet homey kitchen, drinking lemonade. You win, I'm impressed. You did good, Brian, I said as he settled across from me with a glass of lemonade. Brian had never been a drinker. In almost every way, he'd been the opposite of my father, who was pretty much a functional alcoholic. Thanks, Nicky. That means a lot coming from you. I choked a bit on my lemonade. You know your opinion of me always mattered, he said. Actually, I didn't know that. He scoffed. Come on. I placed my glass down and folded my arms. Seriously, Brian, I didn't know my opinion of you mattered at all. He stared at me, unbelieving. You're kidding me. I shook my head. Nope. Your opinion was the only opinion I ever cared about. Could have fooled me, I said, nastier than I intended. He opened his mouth to say something, and then thought better of it. Abruptly, he stood up. Let me show you my horses. I have a few in the stable, and a few others are around somewhere. I hesitated. The stables. We had gotten into a lot of trouble in stables. Good. Fun. Dirty trouble. So of course, I wasn't too sure how smart it would be to go there with him. Hanging out in the stables with him might bring back old memories, and I would end up in a compromising position yet again. And that's what I was trying to avoid. Right? I don't know. It took a while to get here. We should probably just head on back. You scared to spend some time alone with me? If that was what I was afraid of, then I wouldn't be out here with you in the middle of nowhere. Well, the stables are a little different. Really? I said, daring him with the tone of my voice to mention our trysts there. He paid me no mind and powered forward. You know how being around all that hay makes you horny. I made a face at him and punched him in the shoulder. You're such a joker, Brian. I learned from the best, he retorted as he helped me hop down from my stool. He surprised me when he didn't let me go. Instead, he kept his arm casually around my waist as he led me to his stables. Only one of his horses was inside, and he introduced me to her. She's beautiful, I said as I stroked her mane. I call her Sunshine. She was a rescue from a town not too far from here. She's old, doesn't move around much. It doesn't matter, I said, already falling in love with her. She's perfect. And she was. She wasn't a special color or particularly beautiful, but something about her presence was calming as I looked into her dark brown eyes. I almost forgot where I was and who I was with, as I stood there just stroking her. I remember how much you loved horses. I still love them, but I barely get a chance to ride anymore unless I'm going to visit my sister. I let my voice trail off, remembering that the property now belonged to him. As if reading my mind, he said, and I want your sister to have her property back. And after this date she will, so all's well that ends well, right? It's not that simple, Nicky. Nothing's ever simple with you, Brian. I could say the same about you. He was angry and I didn't understand why. What's with your tone? I thought we were having a nice day. From the moment I walked through your apartment door, we've been
Censored.
around the real issue. I couldn't help but laugh.
Censored.
Who even uses that word anymore? My grandfather. I smiled at his mention. How's he doing? I miss him. I miss him too. He died 5 years ago. Instantly, I felt sorrow. I'm so sorry. He was a great guy. One of the best. Brian nodded, staring down at the ground. He was so angry with me when things between us fell apart. I didn't respond. I knew where this conversation was going, and I could already feel the heaviness of what had happened a decade before weighing on me. I thought I could talk about this, but I can't. I can't, Brian. But we have to talk. Apparently neither one of us can move on until we do. I knew he was right and I was about to say so, when I heard a horse's hooves as it neared us. Expecting someone? I asked, and curiously his face tightened. Stay here, he said. But of course, I didn't do as I was told. I followed him to the entry of the stable, where I saw a beautiful woman approaching us. Her hair blew in the wind behind her, as if she were in a movie. She was a brunette, tall, beautiful, model thin. She had hazel eyes, and as she grew nearer, she looked me up and down as if appraising me. What are you doing here, Brianna? I was taken aback by the hostility in his tone. The woman smiled. There was something mean, almost cruel about it that detracted from her beauty. Now come on, Brian. Is that any way to talk to your wife? Chapter 9. Get out of my way, or I'll punch you into next week. I swear I will. I stomped past him and headed in the direction of the car. He followed at my heels. Would you listen to me? Just for a second. He grabbed my arm and I shook it off. Don't touch. Don't ever touch me again, I growled. I could feel the tears threatening to spill, but I didn't care. I felt dirty. So dirty. And under that feeling was pain, so much pain for having been betrayed by the one man I'd ever loved. I made it to the car, and realized then that I didn't have any keys. It wasn't my car, and I hadn't been paying too much attention to where we were going, so I had no clue how to get back home. But there was no way I was going to spend another minute with an ass like Brian. Give me your keys, I said when he caught up to me. What? You heard me. Give me your keys. I want to go home. Then I'll take you, he said, moving towards the passenger door to open it for me. I don't know what possessed me, but the next thing I knew, I was slapping his keys out of his hand and diving for them when they hit the ground. What the? He didn't get the word out, as I sprinted around the truck and jumped in, locking him out. I could hear laughter, and realized that Brianna was gleefully watching the entire scene play out. She was having a great laugh at my expense. I started the truck, feeling enraged by my situation. For good measure, I spun it just enough so that Brianna was sprayed with all sorts of debris and mud. Unfortunately, Brian knew me too well, and had leapt away just in time so I'd missed him. It gave me great pleasure to give him the finger, as I drove tearfully back home. Half an hour later, I found myself sitting in the back of the sheriff's car with my arms folded and my lips pursed. It was like being 15 again, I thought to myself as I kicked the back of his chair in frustration. Of course, he wasn't in the vehicle. He was standing outside with his hands on his hips, talking to Brian. Every now and again, the sheriff would turn and look at me, and I would give him a mean look. He seemed to be amused, and I didn't like it at all. I was a force to be reckoned with, but apparently, he thought differently. He came back to his car and opened his door, and I took the opportunity to make my demands known. If you're going to arrest me, just do it. I'll stay in your dirty, funky, run-down jail if it means being away from that piece of shish. I didn't get the rest out, as the other passenger door opened, and the piece of crap I was talking about sat down right next to me. I reached down to let myself out, when I remembered that it was a cop car. I wasn't getting out unless I was let out. The sheriff smiled at me and said, "You two got 10 minutes to work out whatever lover's quarrel you all are having. I'm going to get a coffee and some donuts. Be back." And with that he left us both locked in the back of his squad car. I wanted to scream, and so I did. I was so frustrated, angry, and more than that, humiliated. When I was done screaming, Brian spoke up. "So did that help?" "Nope," I said bitterly. "You're still here. We need to talk. Talk to your wife. As far as I'm concerned, you can just go ahead and press charges. Don't be silly. I would never screw around as a married man. First of all, I'm not married." "Liar." He sighed. "Can you just listen for a second?" "Why should I listen to you?" "Because I'm telling the truth. Have you ever known me to be a liar, Nikki? Come on. Have I ever lied to you?" Stubbornly, I said, "Who knows? I feel like I don't even know you." "You know me, Nikki. You know me better than anyone else." but not well enough to know you got married. It was short-lived. Brianna is my ex-wife. Up until a few weeks ago, she owned half my property. I just bought her out. And she just happened to be hanging around today? She dropped by unexpectedly to retrieve her horses. Convenient. It's the truth. He tried to reach for my hand, and I hit him away. Don't touch me. Sighing, he said, Look, I'm sorry about not telling you. It didn't seem important. Up until that moment, I'd had my face turned away from him. But I met his eyes as I said coldly, Important? Knowing that you were sharing your life with someone other than me wasn't something you thought I needed to know? His eyes were steely. She's my ex. She has no bearing on anything that goes on between us. No bearing? You fell in love with someone else. You made a promise to someone else. You were there for her like you weren't for me. Your farm. Your horses. Your stupid stables. I was screaming at him now, and my hands were shaking. My voice was hoarse as I said, You built all that with her. Not with me. Tears began to flow down my cheeks, and he reached forward to wipe them away. Again I growled, Don't touch me. He sighed deeply and turned away from me. I figured your sister had told you, but then when you never mentioned it, I just thought maybe you didn't think it was a big deal. Carrie told me nothing. And of course it's a big deal to me, Brian. My voice cracked as I said his name. I didn't expect you to be a saint, but I definitely didn't think you would marry again. I just thought you wouldn't ever want someone to take my place. I shook my head, not caring that he would finally know how I felt after all these years. She didn't take your place. No one could have taken your place, Nikki. No ever has. But she did, I whispered softly. She became your wife, and that infuriates me. It makes me so jealous. I laughed bitterly to myself and wiped my eyes. I knew you'd move on eventually, and I knew you were dating other people soon after we divorced, but foolish me thought that at least I'd have that one thing over others. That I would be the only one you loved enough to marry, but I was wrong. I put my face in my hands, unable to look at him. And I sobbed. I knew I was foolish for believing that his love for me hadn't changed over our decade apart, but I'd been wrong. Only my feelings hadn't changed. And oh God, how that hurt. I breathed deeply and without second-guessing myself, spoke the words I felt. I have always loved you, Brian. I love you as much now as I did 10 years ago. Today, tomorrow, 100 years from now. I'll always love you. When he didn't reply, I forced myself to look at him, and the look on his face wasn't what I was expecting. He looked angry. You love me? Really? His tone was so bitter. He'd never spoken to me like that before, and I moved away from him, shocked by this tone. You loved me so much that you lied to me about my own child? What? I said, not understanding. Admit it, he growled. Tell the truth for once, Nicolette. Stop keeping secrets. I shook my head, thinking back to 10 years ago when I'd sent him away and refused to see him after I'd miscarried. I'd been so angry, so bitter, and I'd needed someone to blame. The miscarriage was no one's fault, but I'd been in so much emotional pain that I'd lashed out. I'd blamed Brian for our loss. I'd convinced myself that if he'd been around more, instead of traveling that night I lost the baby, the miscarriage wouldn't have happened. That I would have made it to the hospital in time. That they would have saved my baby. But I didn't. When Brian had arrived the next day, I'd been so angry, so very angry because being angry was so much easier than dealing with loss. I told him that I never wanted to see him again. I'd called him all sorts of names. I'd insulted him in so many ways. And he just stood there taking it. He took all the blame, and then when I was done, I'd kicked him out of the apartment we shared and told him to never come back. Minutes after he left, I drove myself to a divorce attorney. And to my surprise, Brian hadn't fought me. He hadn't even tried to convince me not to do it. He signed the papers without a peep. I'd been wrong all those years ago, and I forced myself to tell him so. I was so depressed after the miscarriage, Brian. I wasn't myself. I was so angry and irrational. I wanted to punish you for what had happened. It wasn't your fault, but I couldn't punish myself, so I punished you the only way I knew how. I knew how much family meant to you, so it's the one thing I tried to take from you. It was wrong. I was wrong. What happened wasn't your fault. His expression didn't change. His eyes were still hard and unyielding. You're still lying. Stop with the lies, Nicolette. You just didn't want me in your life. Admit it. There wasn't any miscarriage. You just didn't want me anymore. I wasn't good enough for you. I wasn't good enough for your family. What the hell are you talking about? I said. Tara. I'm talking about Tara. I frowned. My niece? He scoffed. Your niece? Really? She looks just like you. And she just happened to be born the same time you were due? That's not a coincidence. Carrie just happened to never mention that she was pregnant to me, were you? Seriously? Is that what you want me to believe? I frowned at him, trying to figure out what he was saying, when finally it dawned on me. Brian, you think Tara is yours? You think she's ours? He stared at me. You think I made up a miscarriage to get rid of you? Brian, that's ridiculous. I'm not some kind of monster. I waited for him to speak, and finally he did. All these years I thought it was my fault. That's why I never bothered to fight you. I felt that I'd failed you. Failed us. Failed the baby. I blamed it all on myself. I didn't deserve to be with you. I'd had the chance for a family, and it had all slipped away, and I was the person to blame. But when I inherited your dad's place, I saw it as a form of redemption, a way to be a part of the family again. But then I saw Tara, and suddenly it all started to make sense, why you pushed me away. Tara's not yours, Brian. I would never do that to you. I pushed you away because our baby died that night. I couldn't deal with losing her, so I pushed you away. I pushed everyone away. I'm not lying to you. I was angry, but I'd have never made up a miscarriage just to get rid of you. Not in a million years would I have lied and hurt you like that. He nodded and reached for my hand. I know it's crazy, but that's how I rationalized you not wanting me around for the past decade. I thought you hadn't wanted me to be a father. Her father. His voice cracked, and I realized that his childhood, growing up abandoned by his parents, had affected him more than I thought possible. I'm immature at best. Hot-tempered. But I'm not a monster. He nodded. I know it was far-fetched. But I think part of me wanted to believe that we hadn't lost our baby, that she was still alive. I took his hand and swallowed hard. Carrie didn't tell me she was pregnant because she didn't come to terms with being pregnant until months after she found out. She kept it a secret, and then when she was finally ready to tell me, I miscarried. She felt so guilty. She'd no reason to, but she felt so guilty when she found out about my loss, our loss. That must have been hard for you, watching Tara grow up knowing our daughter would have been the same age. It was at first, but then I felt that Tara was special, as if God sent her to take some of the hurt away. Brian sighed. Damn, I feel stupid. He shook his head. I know it's irrational and stupid, but when I saw Tara, I wanted desperately to believe that just maybe. I'm sorry, I said, touching his face and turning his head to mine. I'm sorry too for not being there when you needed me. I'm sorry for not being there to take you to the hospital. I'm sorry that you had to deal with the news all on your own. Stop, Brian. It's not your fault. It's no one's fault. It just happened. You didn't know what was going to happen. You were just working. I was wrong for faulting you. What happened had nothing to do with you. He swallowed thickly and took both of my hands in his. I'm sorry for giving up on us so soon. I'm sorry for marrying someone else. If it makes you feel any better, Brianna and I were barely married 2 months before she asked for a divorce. Whoa, you sure know how to pick them. Apparently I'm a terrible husband. I didn't think you were so bad. Brian met my eyes and said, "I can do better, if you're willing to give me a chance." I wrapped my arms around him and he embraced me tightly. "Be mine again, Colette," he whispered against my neck as he placed a small
Censored.
there. The
Censored.
was chaste, sweet, and it made me feel precious and cherished. It was the way Brian had always made me feel, but my pride, immaturity, and sheer stubbornness had blocked my view of how much Brian meant to me now and all those years ago. "I'll be yours again if you promise to be mine." "I promise," he said, leaning down to
Censored.
me. I don't know how much time we spent locked in each other's arms, but we broke apart guiltily when the sheriff knocked on the window and gave us a thumbs up. "Voyeur," I said, rolling my eyes at him. Then I turned to Brian. "You'll get the charges dropped, right? And you'll sign the land over to my sister like you promised?" "I didn't press charges. The sheriff's a friend of mine, and I called him right after you disappeared with my truck and told him to hold you for me when he caught up with you." "Greet," I drawled in my most sarcastic tone. He smiled at me, and I was happy to see him smile again. "And I signed the land over to your sister the day after I learned that I'd inherited it." My mouth flew open. "Hold on. What? So all of this was for nothing? Did Carrie know about this?" "Nope. This was a one-man plan." "Brian?" "Yes," he said, pulling me towards him. "No more secrets. Okay? This time has to be different." He didn't reply, he just
Censored.
me and gently pulled me into his lap, taking his time, letting his lips become reacquainted with mine. I didn't want to let him go, and I groaned in frustration when he pulled away. "No more secrets. No more letting emotions cloud our better judgment. We'll tackle all that life throws at us together," he
Censored.
me hard and promptly pulled back. "Now how about we check out those stables?" I glanced down, knowing exactly what he was referring to as I could feel the evidence of his
Censored.
pressed against my leg in the tight quarters of the squad car. I was very hot and bothered, but more than that I was happy. I was loved. About Summer Cooper. Thank you so much for reading. Without you, it wouldn't be possible for me to be a full-time author. I hope you enjoy reading my books as much as I do writing them. Besides, obviously, reading and writing, I also love cuddling my dogs, shouting at Alexa, being upside down aka yoga, and driving my family cray-cray. Follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Goodreads, BookBub. Get in touch at hello@summercooper.com. www.summercooper.com. Closing credits. This has been Take Me Back, a Cowboy Second Chance romantic short story by Summer Cooper. Auto-narrated using Google technology.